Welcome to the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, the latest addition to the Locked On Sports Network's growing list of college podcasts. I'm your host, Andrew Wade, editor over at dearoldgold.com, where you can find all things black and yellow, analysis, highlight articles, etc. You find whatever you want in terms of writing on dearoldgold.com, and we have a great episode for you today. If you didn't get a chance, please check out the first two episodes from this week. The first episode, we recapped the Iowa-Nebraska game, talked a little bit about a preview for Iowa-Pitt, which took place last night. And then yesterday, we had an opportunity to preview what bowl Iowa may attend, likely the Holiday Bowl, and then also talked about potential postseason awards, which we actually have some more information for you today. So feel free to check those episodes out on Monday and Tuesday. Give us a listen. If you like what you're listening to, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast at. And please, please, please leave us a review. On today's episode, we have some great content for you. We have a recap of last night's Iowa's win over the University of Pittsburgh Panthers. We're going to be touching on defensive and special teams postseason awards. There were awards announced last night from the Big Ten, so have some things to keep you updated on. And then finally, we're going to be touching on Big Ten basketball and how so far the conference is off to a pretty hot start. And where do the Hawks fit into that? What does that mean for Iowa? That sort of thing. So this is an episode you do not want to miss. And then tomorrow we have an awesome interview with Tanner Nessel, one of the site experts over at Badger of Honor, the fan-sided Wisconsin Badger website. So we're going to be talking to him about what the Wisconsin Badgers bring to the game on Friday night. And it is a great conversation, one you do not want to miss. So please check that out tomorrow morning when we have that going up on wherever you get your podcast at. All right, for segment one, we wanted to touch on the Iowa versus Pitt game. And if you didn't get a chance to watch it, it was a relatively ugly game. Pitt got out to a huge start. I believe they were up 10 points or 8 points after the first half, and they were shooting so well. So they were shooting about 60% from the field or even better. Obviously, allowed them to jump out to a 46-40 lead in the first half. Iowa's defense also just wasn't, even though Pitt was shooting really well, Iowa's defense just didn't seem as in sync as it did when they played, UConn or Oregon. So somewhat of a wake-up call. I think, when we talked about this on Monday's, show, Pitt came into the season with relatively low expectations. They were predicted to finish last in the ACC, but with their new coach, with some new players, they had a top 32 class. I think their class was 32 in the nation from last year. They've been performing pretty admirably so far this year, and they really gave Iowa a run for their money. And I don't necessarily think this is as big of an indication that the Hawks are doomed, but rather Pitt is a decent basketball team. They're firing on all cylinders, and they came in ready to play Iowa. So this will be important. Hopefully Iowa, with the expectations that come with being ranked the 14th team in the nation, they can, not fall to those expectations when they face Wisconsin on Friday night in a big Big Ten matchup between the number 14 team and the number 22 team in the nation. From the Iowa perspective, it was kind of an off day. Earlier in the day, Cordell Pemsl was, one of their forwards, their junior forward, was announced to be missing the entire season with a knee surgery. He was supposed to be a key bench contributor, and you kind of showed, when Fran started going to his bench, he really likes to use 10 to 11 players consistently. Last night, he only used 9. So it kind of impacted the way he had his rotation set up, and that obviously played a big factor into, what the Hawks were able to do. Pemsl will get a medical red shirt so he can retain his eligibility and be able to stay with the Hawks for another 2 seasons. So we wish him the best and a speedy recovery. Unfortunate that he will be missing this season, but it'll be great to have him back for at least another 2 years, hopefully. From an Iowa perspective, they struggled shooting the ball, though. They shot 36.5% from the field entirely. They actually shot just a tick better from three-point, but not exactly a great shooting day, especially when you have, forwards like Tyler Cook and Luke Garza. They didn't have, the best day. I'll try to pull it up now and get you some statistics on what they did. So Luke Garza only had 5 points, and he only shot the ball 5 times He was 1 for 1 from 3-point and 2 for 4 from within the paint, and that's not really an ideal stat line. He's been performing really well. He's had some great games, and I would have expected him, considering Pitt has a relatively small lineup, to be able to post up and take the ball, to the hoop down low. He also only had 2 rebounds total, so just an off game from him in general. Tyler Cook also had an off game. He only shot the ball 5 times. He made 1 of those. He did have 12 free throw attempts, which is the team high, and he made 7 of those, which is also a team high, for 9 points. And then he brought in 8 rebounds. So not the game I anticipated from Iowa's big men, but the job got done. And at the end of the day, a win's a win. That's all that matters, but not exactly the performance we were looking forward to seeing. So in terms of minutes, Jordan Bohannon actually took the lead in minutes with 37. That is a season high. He's been averaging around 28 to 32, so 37 is a little bit high for him. And then Joe Wieskamp, the freshman, actually had 34 minutes on the game, and it makes sense. He was having a fantastic day. He was Iowa's arguably one of their best players on the day. He went 7 for 13 and then 4 from 8 from three-point land for a combined total of 18 points. He also had 11 rebounds, so that was a team high as well. When you have forwards like Tyler Cook and Luke Garza, though, Wieskamp getting the most rebounds is a little bit frustrating. You expect those guys to be able to get those rebounds down low, but I think it also speaks to Wieskamp's hustle, Wieskamp's ability to box out and that sort of thing and get those needed rebounds for the game. The big thing here, I think the other thing I want to touch on is, Connor McCaffrey has been playing a lot of minutes as of late and averaging around 25 to 26 minutes, but in the game against Pitt, he only had 20 minutes. He struggled from the field, and he only had 1 point, but he did have the team high of 4 assists, so not exactly the best day for him either. And then Jordan Bohannon, oddly enough, had 6 steals. So Jordan Bohannon is not necessarily known for his defense, not exactly a defensive stalwart, but 6 steals is great. It put Iowa in the positive in terms of turnovers and takeaways against Pittsburgh. So that was huge. The other thing I want to touch on is on the free throws, they only made 67.9%, not exactly ideal. Iowa does do a great job of getting to the free throw line. That is something we talked about when you listen to the Wisconsin-Iowa preview, but they need to connect on more than 67.9%. Typically they've been connecting around the 75 to 80% range, and that would have brought this game to a 10 to 11 point advantage, which would have equaled around what Vegas favored them at. So an off day from the free throw, right, or from free throw, an off day from the field in general. So not exactly the best Iowa performance, but good teams find a way to win, and Iowa squeaked out the victory 69 to 68. So nothing more we can really talk about that. It's a great to get another win, great to go into Big Ten play undefeated. And we're going to be talking to you about Wisconsin versus Iowa for 30 minutes tomorrow. So you do not want to miss that episode. It's going to be great. I honestly learned a lot about Wisconsin basketball. It's tough. You try to watch as many Big Ten games as you can, but ultimately you're going to miss a few things here and there, and it's tough to see every single team. So Tanner brought some great insight as to what the Wisconsin Badgers bring. And for Iowa basketball fans or Iowa sports fans in general, it's an episode that'll give you a lot of information when you begin to watch Friday night's game. And that'll do it for segment 1. It's great that Iowa squeaked out that victory 69 to 68. The other thing I wanted to bring up there is the arena was only at 66% capacity, so not ideal. If you are in the Iowa City area, what you're missing from both Iowa basketball programs is something we typically don't see every single year. The women's team has more consistently been a great program, but you want to make sure you get out there and check those games out. The tickets aren't too expensive. If I were in Iowa City, I would absolutely go there, but unfortunately, I am not. With that being said, on segment number 2, we're going to be talking about postseason awards. Yesterday, the Big Ten handed out a few different awards, and I wanted to give praise to those Iowa football players that received those awards. But before we do that, I have a message for you, the listener, because if you're like me, you hate to miss your favorite team play, regardless of who they are playing. That's where Sling TV comes in. Now I never have to miss a football or a basketball game, and the best part is I no longer have to pay for a bunch of channels I don't even watch with a typical cable package. For just $30 a month, you get access to ESPN, Big Ten Network, and more without the hassle of a long-term contract. What's even more exciting is that we have a fantastic offer for you. Locked On listeners can get a free 7-day trial by going to sling.com/lockedon. That's SLING.com/lockedon. Never miss a game again with Sling TV. All right. Before we jump into segment 2, where we're going to be covering the Big Ten awards that were handed out yesterday afternoon or last night, depending on what part of the country you're in, want to remind you that on segment 3, we're going to be talking about Big Ten basketball, how they're currently doing this year, why they're off to a hot start, and what that means for the Iowa basketball program. Also, before we jump into the specific awards, I wanted to, kind of plug this in. Redshirt freshman Josh Turner is leaving the program. So Josh Turner is a cornerback. Obviously, if you've been watching Iowa football games, he hasn't really been playing, and he's stuck behind 4 guys who are potentially going to be there for a few more years. So junior Michael Ojemudia, sophomore Matt Hankins, and true freshmen Julius Brents and Riley Moss have really been getting most of the playing time, while Josh Turner has been relegated to a special teams role. He's had 5 tackles this season. And, when you're looking at the depth chart, unless one of those guys goes pro early, which I don't necessarily anticipate from Ojemudia or, Matt Hankins or even Riley Moss, maybe Julius Brents, depending on, whether he's able to win the cornerback battle next year. But either way, not a lot of playing time in the future for him. This guy had 22 offers coming out of high school. So there's definitely going to be a large list of suitors, I would assume. And Iowa typically hasn't been too hard on players transferring. So it's an ideal situation for him. He'll get out probably, redshirt and then play in 2 years. So we wish Josh Turner the best. Unfortunate to see him go, but understand why he was, wanting to leave. Now let's get to a few of the happy things. So defensive and special teams awards were released last night by the Big Ten, and Iowa took home a ton of hardware. So 2 individuals actually took home position-specific awards, which is awesome. Amani Hooker, the guy we've kind of talked about, on Dear Old Gold. We talked a little bit about him on the podcast, but he's really been the defensive MVP, and you can tell Kirk Ferentz really trusts him, and so does Phil Parker. He has been really the jack of all trades, moving all around the defense and playing whatever position they need. And he's been involved in every phase of the defense. He's had, I believe, 1 sack. I think he's second on the team in tackles. He has 3 interceptions. I mean, this guy can really do it all. And because of that performance, he was named 2018 Tatum Woodson Defensive Back of the Year. What's incredible about that is most people don't think of University of Iowa as defensive back university. They typically think of, LSU or something along those lines. But this is the 3rd defensive back in a row to win that award and the 4th overall, right behind Josh Jackson, Desmond King, and Micah Hyde. Amani Hooker wasn't done taking in the awards, though. He also received first team All Big Ten defense by both the coaches and the media. So coaches and media both vote on the Big Ten teams, and you'll notice the theme here is that coaches did not give Iowa as much love as the media. So on the coaches' Big Ten team, the second team, we had AJ Epineza coming in at defensive end, and on the third team, we had Anthony Nelson coming in on the third team. So I would expect them to both be a little bit higher from the coaches, but the media did get it right. They had Epineza on the first team All Big Ten, and they had Anthony Nelson bumped up a team to the second team All Big Ten. I mean, both these guys had 10 sacks this season, which is tied for first in the Big Ten, which is typically what you expect from a Big Ten defensive end. 10 sacks is great, especially when there's so much talent in the Big Ten at the edge position. So I don't understand why they weren't getting as much love initially. It wasn't like they were slouches in run defense. In fact, Epineza doesn't play a ton of snaps, so I can see why he may get bumped down for that. But Anthony Nelson is stout in rush defense. I mean, and he's rising up draft boards right now because of his performance. So I think it's a little bit of a annoyance that he was only given third team by the coaches, but it is what it is, and you kind of got to deal with it. The other thing to note there is that both teams received Defensive Player of the Week honors twice this season. So 33% of the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week honors went to those 2 Iowa defenders, and for some reason, they weren't able to get on the first team or the second team from the coaches. So a little frustrating, but it's all good. It's nice to see Hawkeye defenders getting recognized for their work. And then rounding out the all Big Ten teams, on the honorable mention team, we had Parker Hesse, the senior, really the veteran leader of the Iowa Hawkeyes defense. He has 52 tackles and 4 sacks. He was honorable mention defensive end. And then sophomore safety Geno Stone, who is tied for second in the conference with 4 interceptions. Senior safety Jake Gervais had 77 tackles and 3 interceptions. And then senior defensive lineman Matt Nelson had 27 tackles and 6 passes defensed. For those of you who are, keeping track of these awards at home, that is 2 of Iowa's reserve players getting Big Ten honors. They had 3 safeties and 4 defensive linemen. So a lot of depth at some key positions, a lot of fantastic play all around, and pretty impressive when 2 of your backup players are getting Big Ten honors, and Geno Stone and AJ Epinesa. And I'm excited for the future. This is, we're losing some of those guys, right? We're losing Jake Gervais and Matt Nelson and Parker Hesse, but there's a chance that Anthony Nelson returned for another year. We definitely have AJ Epinesa for another year. There's a solid chance we have Amani Hooker. I've been checking out draft boards, and he hasn't been, listed on there anytime as of late. So good news, we'll probably be keeping him as well. And then Geno Stone will be staying with the Hawks as well, considering he's just a sophomore. So there's quite a few players who have had outstanding performances and have the opportunity to build on those leading into their next season. And then on special teams, maybe not super surprising, but something I noted in an article on Dear Old Gold was that I believed Ihmir Smith-Marsette should get an award for special teams, but I didn't think he would get this many awards. And what I mean by that is not only did he finish first, or he was voted first team All Big Ten by the media, he's only voted second team All Big Ten by coaches. Like I said, I don't believe the coaches really know what they're talking about, apparently, because they've kind of underrated a lot of Hawkeyes so far. But the big thing here was that Ihmir Smith-Marsette was given the 2018 Rogers Dwight Return Specialist of the Year. And that is incredible. That if you didn't catch that, Rogers Dwight, the Dwight part is named after former Iowa legend Tim Dwight, who averaged 28.7 yards per return in 1997. Ihmir Smith-Marsette, for context, has a 0.6 yard per return average better difference than Tim Dwight. So he averaged 29.3 yards, which is second best in the nation. And like I said, almost a full yard greater than Tim Dwight. What's more impressive that he did, he had 557 yards returning on kicks, which was third best in the conference, but he did it on just 19 attempts. So the other 2 guys had over 10 attempts more than Ihmir Smith-Marsette, yet he had 19 and pulled out 557. The thing I noted that would potentially hurt him is his lack of touchdown returns, but that's only a matter of time. I expect that to happen sooner rather than later. This guy is explosive, though, and it's fantastic to have someone on special teams who can flip the field, someone who offenses or other opposing special teams have to work to avoid because of his talent and his ability to line the Hawkeye offense up with such good field position. So congratulations to those guys, fantastic performances. And then the last person to kind of bring up on the special team side is senior kicker Miguel Recinos, received honorable mention All Big Ten. So kudos to you, Miguel Recinos. Nice work on the season. He had a fantastic Iowa career, especially the last 2 seasons. This year he connected on all 44 of his extra point attempts, and I believe 15 of 20 on field goals. So 75% clip, not bad. He actually, I think, put in 89 or 87 total points, which is fantastic. One of the best seasons by an Iowa kicker in recent history. And that wraps it up for the Big Ten Awards. We are going to be probably talking about the Big Ten Offensive Awards, hopefully either tomorrow or on Friday's podcast. And I do believe we're going to be pulling out a Friday podcast. It may not be as long, but something we want to cover a few more topics. And, when Tanner and I started talking yesterday, it was just such a good conversation that I did not want to miss out on the opportunity to give you all some insight and a little bit longer discussion into what Wisconsin brings versus Iowa. So we're probably going to be keeping the podcast tomorrow just focused on that. And then maybe Friday you can get a little special episode for your Friday commute, talking on a few other things that have happened over this week. All right. So on segment 3, we're going to be talking about the Big Ten basketball conference and why does it look so strong. But before we do that, we have a few messages from our sponsors. All right, we are back. Like I said, for segment 3, I want to touch on the Big Ten because they have jumped out to an incredible start so far this year. Right now, the Big Ten is playing the Big Ten ACC Challenge. The series is currently tied at 4-4, and there have been some interesting wins, some interesting losses. Most notably, last night, number 9 Michigan lost to Louisville in overtime, which is unfortunate, but it happens. The ACC is strong, and Louisville typically has a decent program, regardless of what coach is there and whatnot. So it happens. Not too big of a deal. Also, Penn State, who's been kind of the worst, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, knocked off number 13 Virginia Tech last night. So that has been great. Today we have an awesome slate of games. If you have an opportunity, make sure you check out these games. They're going to be huge in terms of getting that respect for the Big Ten that the Big Ten ultimately, I think, deserves. So tonight we have number 4 Virginia taking on number 24 Maryland. We have number 19 Purdue taking on number 15 Florida State. And we have number 11 North Carolina taking on number 7 Michigan. So, the Big Ten coming into the season had 3 teams ranked, not a ton of love. There's a lot of confusion or uncertainty surrounding the Big Ten and what some teams brought to the table. But a lot of teams have come out really hot, played really well. The ACC as well has a lot of really top tier teams. And then in the middle of the pack, they weren't really sure. A lot of teams have started off strong in the ACC as well. So this isn't, this is a really good matchup and awesome, cross-conference slate of games that we have going on. But if Maryland, Purdue, and Michigan can pull off, at least go 2-1 of these games, that would look so well for the Big Ten. And it also looks really well for Iowa when they play some of these teams in Big Ten conference play. Gives them a little bit more respect, gets their strength of schedule up as well, which is great. So just thinking about, I wanted to touch on how incredible this Big Ten conference is played. Starting the season, there were 3 teams that were ranked in the top 25, and that was Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue. Meanwhile, 4 teams were receiving votes for inclusion, and that was Wisconsin, Indiana, Nebraska, Maryland. But those teams weren't actually ranked, right? They just were receiving some rankings. They were receiving some votes, but nothing, to write home about. They weren't actually in the top 25. However, 4 weeks later, we now have 7 Big Ten teams in the top 25. And that is Iowa, Wisconsin, Maryland, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue. And there's also a few teams that are actually getting votes for, Big Ten inclusion. So that is Nebraska, Minnesota, and Indiana. So those teams are also getting, some remarks or some votes for top 25. I don't think Indiana may not get as much now after getting kind of smoked by Duke last night, but pretty impressive when you consider that, nearly almost a third of the top 25 is comprised of Big Ten teams. And depending on how this week's slate of games go, we could see a few more teams added to that list. We're going to kind of go through the rundown of the different teams and where, what kind of jumps they've made over the year, just kind of quickly. And the first one we want to talk about is obviously the Iowa Hawkeyes, who started the preseason and not ranked, and now they are number 14. And really the big catalyst for this was their win over number 13 Oregon, a team that has a lot of high expectations coming into the season, and then beating the University of Connecticut, which has been consistently receiving votes for the top 25 throughout the season. So big thing there. Also, they're currently undefeated, which is fantastic. The Badgers, they came into the preseason, not ranked, but they are now 22nd in the nation. Their lone loss came to number 4 Virginia by 7 points. They did squeak out a victory last night, and this team is coming off a lot of injuries from last year. They have some great players, and they are expected to make a run in the NCAA tournament, and you'll hear a lot more about that tomorrow. The Maryland Terrapins, they were also not ranked. Now they're 24th in the nation. They're sitting at 6-0, and they have a big game tonight, so make sure you check that out against, I believe, number 4 Virginia. And then the Buckeyes were also unranked, and they are now ranked 16th in the nation, and they have a big game tonight as well as they take on, Florida. Let me pull it up. I'll make sure I get the the games for you. But Ohio State does have a big game as well coming up, so don't want to miss that. Fantastic that they are doing so well this year, starting the season off 6-0. Michigan started off number 19, and they are now ranked number 7. They beat number 8 Villanova by nearly 30 points, and that was a huge catalyst for them. They have a big game tonight as they take on the Tar Heels from North Carolina. Michigan State was ranked number 10. They are now number 9, but they did lose last night to Louisville. They also lost to number 2 Kansas by 5 points. They beat number 17 UCLA by 20, though. So I don't foresee the Louisville loss being too detrimental. They'll drop a few spots in the rankings, but in college basketball, a team gets hot, a team does well, they can win regardless of being, the lower talented team. So it happens, but unfortunate. And then finally, Purdue was ranked 24th to begin the season, and they are now ranked 19th. Their lone loss came to number 16 Virginia Tech, and they play tonight against Florida State. So do not want to miss that game either. Would be an awesome game if they can knock off number 15 Florida State. And that really does it for, where the Big Ten teams have gone so far early in the season. Like I said, this is huge, though. The only issue I see is that the Big Ten is talented from top to bottom, and so every single game is going to be tough. Teams that survive that Big Ten slate are going to get a lot of recognition from the NCAA tournament committee. I would say similar to the Big East a few years ago, where really teams were cannibalizing wins from each other. And although they may not get the best seed, they're not going to be a top 5 or top 10 team. Having that tough slate of games, going through kind of the gauntlet of teams, will really help the teams out in the long run. For an Iowa team, it'll make them battle tested and they'll be ready for the NCAA tournament. So I'm really excited about what the Big Ten is doing so far early in the season. I'm excited about the Iowa Hawkeye basketball team as well. And we're going to have tons of coverage coming to you for the rest of the season as we follow the Iowa Hawkeye men's team and the women's team, who, is doing just as well as the men's basketball team. They only have 1 loss in the season. So great stuff coming for the Hawkeyes this winter. We'll want to keep you posted on that. So, keep listening to our podcast. And like I said, I don't want to keep harping on this, but if you haven't had an opportunity to, make sure to go subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast at. And please feel free to leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. And that'll do it for, our Big Ten conference preview, kind of a wrap up of what's happened over the last month. We are going to conclude our Wednesday episode. Again, we'll be back tomorrow with fantastic content on the Iowa versus Wisconsin matchup with Tanner Nessel, one of the site experts over at Badger of Honor for the Fansided Network. You also can check Dear Old Gold. We have a few articles coming out over the next couple of days previewing the Iowa versus Wisconsin matchup and some additional content touching on the awards, touching on where Iowa may go in a bowl game and that sort of thing. So great content going up there if you want to check something out in between podcast episodes. With that, though, I'm going to be signing off. I'm your host, Andrew Wade. You can find me on Twitter at Wade_Andrew, and you can follow all the exciting happenings of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast on Twitter at Locked On Iowa. Again, make sure you subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts at, and you can also reach out to me with questions, comments, or suggestions at lockedonhawkeyes@gmail.com. That is right. We have an email address now, lockedonhawkeyes@gmail.com. Thank you all for joining us on another great episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Have a fantastic day, Hawkeye Nation, and we'll be back tomorrow.